This is your host, Bhartia, and welcome to another episode of TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us Dennis Zimmer, CTO and co-founder of Codemotary. Dennis, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Before we get started, I would love to know a bit about the company itself. You are a co-founder, so tell me, what does Codemotary do?
So Codemotary has been founded in 2018, and we had from the start the goal that we were able to verify every digital asset. And we focused pretty soon also on artifacts. So whatever artifacts are in the software pipeline, be it a build, a file, source code, or then also a Docker container image, everything should be verifiable. And everybody should be able also to get an idea who gave trust. So who trusted a certain asset. And since then, actually, we came a long way. We also started to develop our own immutable database that is open source. It's called ImmuDB. And we just also released a community attestation service that is also completely free. And we have a commercial product called Codemotary Cloud that covers all needs from source to production when it comes to follow digital artifacts, the provenance of it, and of course then also if you trust or maybe untrust something. And what is special about us is we don't use any digital certificates for it. So everything is being done using an immutable database. So a append-only database where everything that is stored can be verified and cryptographically verified by every client.
I want to understand from you is the importance of understanding open source or just software supply chain. Then only we can kind of mitigate it. So talk about what is software supply chain, what is bill of material. Then we'll talk about the other aspect of it.
From a software supply chain perspective, it can be very simple. So a lot of companies are still in a very early phase, I would say. So they have some scripts, maybe they have some continuous integration tooling. So they have sources, they build a certain software, they test it, and then they ship it independently to production. So it's not an automated process from building to production. And when we created all of our tooling and all of our software, we always had in mind also the non-automated fashion and also a supply chain that maybe is cut in half. So you have an automatic part and you have a manual part, and still everything needs to work. So when you combine these information, it's always important that you have a single source of truth where you can connect to, where you can verify, did I already touch this source code? Did I touch this binary? Did I touch this script? Is it mine? Did it came from an external consultant or a third-party vendor? And typically, I also want to, and that is more the bill of materials part, I want to know what is inside. So in an open source fashion, as mentioned, it's pretty easy. You have some kind of requirements file, or you have some kind of information that you can use during build time. But there are also, in the meantime, open standards like SPDX or CycloneDX, where a vendor could provide you with a binary as well as the software bill of materials file. And as long as it follows the standard, you could either attach it as evidence inside of your supply chain or software supply chain, or you could use this information to, I would say, link to the artifacts that you know. And that way you have a full transparency from either you create your own source or you have it shipped by a third-party vendor, and what is running in my production right now. So for us, it's always important, and for our customers, how can we connect the dots? So how can I also traverse from my production back to the binary that has been tested and built? When was it built? And when it comes to software bill of materials, I also think that information like a vulnerability scanner report or a compliance scanner report needs to be attached as well, because these situations can change. So it was okay to ship something in production on Monday, but on Wednesday there's a vulnerability and now it's not okay anymore. How do I prove that back on Monday it was okay? So the software supply chain is much more than just the code, just some attestation capabilities. It's also about storing evidence, why something happened. And of course, the way back and forth. So I need to be able from source to production, but also from production back to source to understand who developed it, where did it come from, when was it tested, is it still compliant or not, and eventually being able also to pull out something out of production manually as well as in a fully automated fashion.
Excellent. There are a couple of things that I want to discuss. You mentioned compliance, and the second thing is that with open source, if you just look at MySQL or MariaDB database, there are so many maintainers who maintain it. So you also, you can add a repo, whether it's you're doing Debian or it doesn't matter what you're doing. So one is that, and then there may be, as you mentioned, changes that you made or changes made in the upstream of the project as well. Sometimes, we can also talk about containers where there may be hard links to the project, and those hard links can be changed by the one whoever created that image that you're pulling into it. So can you talk about the risks that are there by not knowing what's going into your supply chain? It could be security or it could also be compliance. For example, if you are doing a lot of internal coding, you might be violating GPL license, or you may be exposing your own IP. And when somebody can go and sue you, or if you are going for an acquisition, that can become a big challenge as well. So talk about the risks of not knowing what isn't there.
I actually can give you a real customer example. The customer was using a component where they signed a contract and an agreement to use the software for a certain period of time. And now suddenly the terms were not good enough anymore. So the parties actually wanted to terminate the agreement and of course to make sure the software is not being used anymore from this day on. If you don't know where it's being deployed right now, and if you don't know where it has been used, you automatically violate from the very same day the agreement that just has been terminated, and you are automatically up for a legal fight in the worst case. So that is just a real example that can happen to pretty much anyone, any company, any kind of software. But you mentioned also GPL or other more restrictive licenses. If you don't know when you deployed something, because very often also licenses change over time. If you don't know what has been deployed and when, and is it still the version with a, I would say, better license for my enterprise, or now a license that I don't want in my environment anymore, you cannot revoke it. So you cannot really get back and pinpoint, is it still in my production, or maybe it's just part of a backed up application, but we are not using it anymore. And that is a huge risk, of course, for any company. But when you take the SolarWinds case is, of course, a very popular one. But in this case, a lot of companies still don't know if they're affected or not, because they don't have an inventory or a catalog. They don't have an idea what DLLs and libraries are being used for certain software pieces. So if you would be able to search for the unique fingerprint, and pretty much everything has a unique fingerprint, a file, a container image, even a base layer of a container image. If you could find it and revoke it immediately, that is exactly what we provide. So you don't need to have physical access to this file or to this container image anymore. You just need to know what part of it has the following fingerprint. And on this information, you can revoke or just unsupport for a temporary amount of time a certain container image. So you're not sure. It could also happen, that's also a real customer case. There was a vulnerability scanner cluster, and one of the cluster nodes was outdated for a couple of days. So how do we know afterwards what is now running in my production and was scanned by an outdated scanner? In our case, the scanner has an identity, the digital asset has a fingerprint, and we create a transaction based on it. So you can always follow the traces, and you can know exactly what an outdated scanner scanned and if it's still out there.
Now, let's just talk about the basic rules again. We're talking about software supply chain. We're talking about bill of material. There are a lot of solutions out there, but how much awareness is there within the users or industry? How much they are they are creating bill of course because of some government requirements. They do have to do that. But in general, what has been your kind of perspective that companies are fully aware of it, they're taking steps, or you're like, we still have to do a lot of work to actually educate them about it?
There's definitely a lot of work to do. So, what I mentioned in the beginning, there are so many customers at different stages. Some, especially the companies that just created software or started to create software, for them it's so much easier. They can use all the tools around to automate the whole CI/CD journey. But when it comes to heritage, or I would say legacy applications, that have never seen any CI/CD pipeline, it's extremely hard. And but for a complete success of protecting a supply chain or software supply chain, we need to have a combination of both. So you cannot just exclude one of the legacy applications and hope for the best. If this legacy application has an issue, then your whole software stack is at risk. And so to answer your question, it's really very, very, very mixed. So we see very advanced customers. I would say everybody cares about it, but for some customers, it's just a very long way to go from the current development and how they develop today to a fully secured software pipeline, including a bill of materials. So I think the first step is also not the bill of materials. It's being sure, having a provenance in place, having an attestation in place for the already built application. And the software bill of materials is then the next step. And that is, when it comes to standards, it's not really a standard, but SALSA framework from Google. So for software supply chain levels, for software artifacts, it's already a very good guideline where you see exactly where you are as a company today. Are you at the lowest level, level 1, where you just have an idea of your current artifacts and what you're using? Or are you already in a higher level? And level 4 becomes extremely hard because you need to store immutable your software bill of materials. You need to store immutable a lot of results of your software pipeline. And I would say it's nearly impossible to achieve without automation. Therefore, the automation and then solutions like ours that provide immutability and provide also client verification and automation is extremely important to implement into any of the journeys towards the SALSA framework as well.
Yeah, let's now talk about, since it's a very good segue to that, let's talk about your solutions. How do you really help these customers, either, as you said, new players who are still writing, or we look at a brownfield, they have a lot of legacy code up there. But talk about how do you help them, what kind of services or products you offer?
So first of all, our solution is always a combination of APIs, CLIs, and then our backend who stores all the data immutably. And the CLI part can be run, of course, manually. It can be run in a script, in a CI, or in the full-blown CI/CD pipeline. So we, from the beginning, we always designed it that a human can run it as well as a machine. And we take into account also the different, I would say, the stages of a company. Because when you start using us for the first time, you need to trust everything you have, right? So there's a kind of a baseline that you need to set. You more or less say, okay, everything that is currently in my environment, I need to trust. But compared to digital certificates, we can change this status. So if you encounter weeks later a situation where you think, oh, I cannot trust the software, you can revoke trust for this specific artifact. So you don't need to revoke a whole certificate or everything that is attached to it. You can really precisely revoke a certain piece of software, a certain library, or a certain container image. So that makes the onboarding so much easier for customers because they can start with a baseline and then they can change over time and change also their opinion over time. When implementing also vulnerability scanners or implementing compliance scanner. And then they can use these new functionalities and this new information to change the trust they give to any of their artifacts or applications. And one thing that became very obvious to us is if it's only a commercial service, you will never reach the majority of people. So there needs to be something where everybody, a small or a single maintainer of a tiny software, or also larger open source projects, they need to be, or open operating system providers, they need to be able to use something that everybody can use free of charge without any kind of limitations when it comes to attestation, for example. And therefore, we released about a week ago the community attestation service, where you just register with your email address, and based on your identity that you get in return, you can start trusting files, source code repositories, container images, and even the software bill of materials of container images. And you can provide this information to others, like some open source projects do. So I'm going to send you my assigner ID, and starting from them, you can authenticate and verify if this software is really coming from me. And I can untrust at some point in time, say, hey, you should go away from this version because I'm not supporting it anymore. And that platform, we think, is a major milestone to really achieve and get into the whole software attestation, software supply chain protection, because you can start in a very simple way, just with a command line, but you can also fully automate it using GitHub Actions or whatever kind of CI/CD application you want to use.
The recent Biden administration's, executive order, what role is that playing in kind of encouraging, though it restricts, to the companies who are serving federal agencies or other agencies, but how much is it helping you folks to, kind of change the cultural shift?
Actually, a very important point. I think the priority just changed over the last, basically, with the presidential executive order for cybersecurity. I think the awareness changed completely. That is also what you see with the latest KubeCon. The topic was software supply chain protection. How can you make sure that you have attestation in place, and so on. So I think the priority massively increased from a year ago to today. And we are just getting started. So also solutions are getting left and right. People have other ideas how to create the standards, of course, but also how to create a software bill of materials in the simplest way. But from a technology perspective, I also think we have technology in place. There are solutions that are digital certificate based. There are solutions like ours that are more cryptographic verification that lives without digital certificates. And honestly, from an adoption perspective, I'm an absolute believer that it all boils down to simplicity. So if a solution is not easy to use, people are not going to use it. If it can't be integrated extremely easy into existing processes, it's not going to be adopted. And of course, if it cannot be automated at all, then you are stuck very quick and you won't ever reach the goal of having a full integration into your, no matter if it's a software pipeline or whatever kind of process. So I think we are now, the awareness is there. People have the topic on their agenda. Probably in 2022, it will be much more focused. And I would say most of the technology, even if some of the ideas are still in an alpha or in an early stage, they are already tested. So, for example, Google has it in place already for many years. So they are already tested in large-scale environments. So now it's more about how can smaller companies, how can the average company adopt a similar or at least a portion of this protection. And we do our best, offering very simple to use solutions where there's no burden to get it up and running. So that is, so no friction at all. You can start with it. You can easily create bill of materials. You can easily attest, notarize, verify, and I think over time people will find out how simple it is also to integrate into existing pipelines, and that is my firm belief that the simplicity is going to change it.
Right. Since we were talking about the bill of material, which is more or less a US-centric executive order, but what trends are you seeing globally? Europe, in some cases, they are way ahead when it comes to privacy or all these stuff. So talk about whether this is going to be, when you said in 2022, we will be taking it more seriously. Is it going to be a global phenomenon, or is it going to be a US-only phenomenon?
I think it's already starts to be very global. So I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago in Switzerland, in Germany, in the UK, and everybody knows about the executive order. And everybody knows about it's important that we get a solution in place, that we know what we currently own, what we currently run. And the biggest fear for the companies is what happens if I see on the news there's another kind of a SolarWinds attack, and my boss is asking me for the second time, hey, are we affected? And I need to say, I have no idea. Give me a couple of weeks and I find out. I think that is one of the biggest fears that we currently see. And to be honest, it makes a ton of sense to have an answer to that in the best way would be instantly, but at least in a very short amount of time, because otherwise, how can I really mitigate a risk fast enough if I don't even know if I'm affected or not?
Right. Since we are talking about the bill of materials, which is more or less a US-centric executive order, but what trends are you seeing globally? For example, Europe, in many cases, they're way ahead of us when it comes to things like privacy and many other topics. So when you said that in 2022, you'll be taking it more seriously, is it going to be a global phenomenon, or is it going to remain a US-only phenomenon because of this executive order?
No, I honestly think it's the main driver. It's the main driver. I mean, in Europe, of course, GDPR and privacy was one of the first topics. But when it comes to software supply chains, I would even say that some of the larger corporations in the US are much more advanced than many companies in Europe. But it's the Joe Biden executive order opened the eyes for many people. So and then you cannot deny it anymore. It's now it's there. You cannot say, okay, I wasn't aware of it. I had no idea that we need to do something like it. So I think this is now globally. It's globally started, and it's also about the vendors, because if you run software, let's say software as a service, then you don't know anything about the software bill of materials of the guys who are running the software as a service. So the next step will be, hey, they need to disclose the software bill of materials as well. Why should I use a SaaS service where I have no idea if the software behind it leaks data or something like this? So I think we're just getting started, and but it's a global effort now.
Dennis, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about not only, of course, the company, but also the importance of understanding, knowing supply chain and bill of material and the work that you folks are doing there. So thanks for the discussion today, and I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you for your time today.
Captain, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.